A tiny needle, maybe an inch long, sometimes less. And yet, for millions of people, the sight of it is enough to make their heart race, their hands sweat, and their legs feel like they might give out completely, while the person next to them sits there, relaxed, barely even noticing. Same needle, same room, completely different reaction. So what's actually going on? Why does a small, thin piece of metal trigger what feels like full-blown terror in some people and nothing at all in others? The answer has almost nothing to do with pain tolerance and everything to do with how your brain has been trained to respond. And once you understand what's actually happening inside your mind during that moment, the fear starts to look very different. Let's give this fear its proper name first. Trypanophobia is the name for fear of needles or injections. But forget the term. What matters is understanding what it actually is and how incredibly common it turns out to be. Research suggests that somewhere between 20 and 30% of adults experience significant fear around needles. Not mild discomfort, actual fear that affects their behavior, causes them to avoid medical appointments, and in some cases leads to physical reactions like dizziness or fainting. That's not a small number. That's roughly 1 in 4 people. And yet, most people who experience this feel uniquely embarrassed by it. They apologize to nurses. They laugh it off nervously. They describe themselves as ridiculous for being afraid of something so small. They are not ridiculous. They are experiencing something their brain learned to do at some point, for reasons that made complete sense at the time. And that is a very important distinction, because what is learned can also be understood, and what is understood can be changed. Here's where it gets interesting. To understand why needles trigger such a strong response, you have to understand one specific part of how the brain works. Your brain has a threat detection system. Its entire job is to scan your environment constantly, identify anything that could cause harm, and respond before you've even consciously registered what you're looking at. This system is fast, faster than thought, faster than logic. And for a person with needle fear, this system has one very specific entry in its database: needle equals threat. The moment that signal is detected, whether it's the actual needle, a photo of one, or even just walking into a room that smells like a clinic, the brain fires the alarm. Stress hormones release, heart rate climbs, breathing shortens, muscles tighten. This is the fight, flight, or freeze response, and it is completely automatic. The person experiencing it didn't choose it. They can't simply decide not to have it. It happens before the thinking brain even gets involved. Here's what most people never realize. This response was not designed for needles specifically. It was designed for genuine physical threats. The brain is using survival machinery that is thousands of years old to respond to a modern medical tool. It's not a malfunction. It's a mismatch. The brain is doing exactly what it was built to do. It just learned the wrong trigger somewhere along the way. And that somewhere is exactly what we need to look at next.
Not everyone develops needle fear. So what makes the difference? The most common starting point is a past experience that the brain filed under painful or threatening. A vaccination in childhood that hurt more than expected. A blood draw that was handled roughly or without enough preparation. A medical procedure that felt overwhelming and out of control. The brain doesn't need the experience to be objectively traumatic. It just needs it to have felt threatening in that moment. And for a child especially, who has no context for what a needle is or why it's happening, that threshold is very easy to cross. This is called learned fear, and it works through a simple mechanism. The brain pairs two things together: the needle and the bad experience. And from that point forward, every needle carries the emotional weight of that original moment. But personal experience isn't the only way this develops. Watching someone else react badly to a needle can be enough. A parent who visibly tensed up at every injection, an older sibling who cried and struggled, a scene in a film or television show that was graphic or frightening. The brain learns by observation just as powerfully as it learns through direct experience. There's also something worth mentioning about the specific nature of this fear that sets it apart from many others. It involves the body being entered, a boundary being crossed. Even for people who handle pain reasonably well in other contexts, there is something psychologically distinct about a sharp object penetrating the skin. It triggers a deep, almost instinctive sense of vulnerability, a feeling of having no control over what is being done to your own body. That loss of control, even briefly, even in a completely safe medical context, is for many people the most frightening part. Not the pain, a powerlessness. And that changes how we need to think about helping people through it. Here's something that surprises most people. Needle fear is one of the only phobias that can cause a person to physically faint. Not from panic, not from hyperventilating, but through a very specific and well-understood biological process. It's called the vasovagal response. Here's what that actually means in simple terms.
When most fears trigger the nervous system, they cause the heart rate and blood pressure to go up. That's the standard threat response. More blood pumping, body ready to act. But needle fear in some people triggers a second response that runs in the opposite direction. The brain, after initially spiking the alarm, overcorrects. It sends a signal that causes the heart rate to suddenly drop and blood vessels to widen. Blood pressure falls rapidly, and because the brain is the organ most sensitive to drops in blood supply, it temporarily reduces activity to protect itself. The result is dizziness, a graying of vision, ringing in the ears, and sometimes a full loss of consciousness. The brain essentially performs an emergency shutdown. Now here is possibly the most underappreciated part of this entire fear. For a large number of people with needle anxiety, the anticipation is significantly worse than the actual injection. Think about what happens in the waiting room or the night before a scheduled blood draw. The mind starts running through it in advance. How much will it hurt? What if something goes wrong? What if I faint? What if I react badly and people see? What if it's worse than last time? Each of those thoughts is a mental rehearsal of a bad outcome, and the brain, remarkably, responds to vividly imagined threats almost the same way it responds to real ones. So by the time the person actually sits down for the injection, their nervous system has already been activated multiple times just by thinking about it.
The body arrives at the needle, already stressed, already tensed, already primed for pain. And tense muscles around an injection site do make it hurt more, which confirms the fear, which makes the next anticipation cycle even more intense. The mind didn't just react to the experience. The mind helped create it. This is not a criticism of people who experience this. It is simply how imagination interacts with fear. And recognizing it is one of the most useful tools available because it means a significant portion of the suffering happens in the mind before the needle ever appears. Which means that's also where a significant portion of the relief can come from. Here's the pattern that keeps this fear alive long after the original experience that created it. Avoidance. When something causes fear, the natural and completely understandable response is to stay away from it. Cancel the appointment. Delay the blood test. Find reasons why it isn't urgent right now. And in the short term, that avoidance works. The anxiety drops. There's relief. But here's what avoidance does over time. It sends the brain a very clear message. That thing you avoided, it was genuinely dangerous. You were right to escape it. Good job surviving. The fear doesn't weaken through avoidance. It strengthens. Because every time you avoid the needle and feel relief,
Let's talk about what actually helps in the moment. These are not medical prescriptions. They are practical, psychologically grounded techniques that many people find genuinely useful. The first is simply looking away. This sounds almost too obvious, but it works because a significant part of the fear response is visual. The brain is tracking the needle. It is watching for the threat. Removing that visual input removes a continuous stream of threat signals. Looking at something neutral, a spot on the wall, a corner of the ceiling, shifts the brain's attention away from the source of the alarm. The second is controlled breathing.